Well, hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I'm your host. And today I've got another great guest, Mr. Bill Karau. He is the owner and inventor of the Karubecue C-60 wood-fired smoker. I'll be right back. We'll talk to Bill about how he created the most unique wood-fired smoker on the market.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey, all, I want to introduce you to a company I just started working with, Fresh Jack's Organic Spices out of Jacksonville, Florida. They're a small, family-run company that's fast-growing. I've tried a bunch of their different seasoning blends and spices, and I can tell you they're all fresh, all organic. None of them contain artificial flavors or sweeteners. None of them have anti-caking agents or preservatives. They all taste like they were just made for you yesterday. Check them out, guys. They're on Amazon in the link below. They have different sample packs, different blends. Like I said, they also have the individual seasonings and spices as well. Fresh Jack's Organic Spices. Check them out, guys. I love them. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I am your host, of course, and today I've got another great guest, one that I hope you guys will enjoy. I have Mr. Bill Karau. He is the owner and inventor of the Karubecue CBQ C-60 inverted flame barbecue pit. I want to say it like that because I want people to understand this is just not a regular smoker or grill you can go buy at Home Depot. So welcome, Bill. Where are you from? Hi. What do you do? Who are you?
So I'm from Southlake, Texas. I grew up in Houston and went off and drove submarines in the Navy for 5 years and came back to Texas and worked in the semiconductor industry for 5 years and then worked in consulting for another 5 years and then worked in the building products industry for going on 20 years now.
So this is the KBQ is kind of your side gig, or is this something
the KBQ is a hobby gone bad. It never, I didn't try to start a business. It just sort of happened. I tried to solve a problem and met with some success in solving that problem. And that sort of became a business. So yeah, it's keeps me out of bars.
Yeah. So how did you get involved in, you did a little bit of rundown. You were in the Navy running submarines, and how did you get involved in barbecue, and how did you make it to where you wanted to build a smoker?
Right. So there's really one guy to blame for all of this, and his name is Steve Sweeney. He's an old buddy of mine, goes way back to high school and college, roommates and all that stuff. And I want to say in 1997 or 1998, Steve had the idea that we should do a barbecue tour. And I said, well, that sounds great. I'm in. What's a barbecue tour? And now there's lots of folks doing it. He was sort of on the leading edge of that whole thing. And we went, he said, we're going to go eat barbecue a few times and write down what we think about it. Oh, okay. So within 5 years, that was 8 guys crammed in a 15-passenger van for 3 days straight, eating barbecue 6 or 7 times a day, every August. And we did that until everyone's kids started getting old enough to where, sports and all that kind of crowded out. But we've collectively probably been to maybe 300, 400 barbecue joints around the U.S. And Steve has an exhaustive cataloging of that on bbqtours.org. And so that was a few years, or more than a few, but a lot.
So that's pretty much like a pub crawl, but on steroids with barbecue.
Exactly. And, it's not long before you realize the rookie mistake is being really hungry on day one, and you eat until you're sort of satisfied at the first joint, and you're crying like a baby by the time the whole thing is over. But I'm the engineer nerd. So my undergraduate degree was in engineering, and I've been in technology in one way or another for a long time. And we would always make a point to go talk to the pit boss and to go look at the pit. And so that just sort of piqued my interest. And seeing barbecue made on a lot of different kind of pits, and seeing results that somewhat, but not perfectly, seem to correlate with how they were being managed and what kind of pit it was, and trying to sort of turn something that is commonly thought of as an art into a science. That really got me going. And I said, I got to be able to figure this out. It's cooking meat with fire has been around for a very long time, but there's a surprising amount of unknowns associated with it. And I was determined that I was going to solve that, and that it wouldn't take very long, and I'll just bear down on this problem. And it turned out to take a whole lot longer than that, about 4 years before I kind of eventually got to the core technology that's embodied in the KBQ pits now.
Yeah, I looked on your website, and you have a little chronological order of when you started and where you finally hit the current product that you have now. And it like you said, you kind of said, well, I thought it was going to take a couple of months, but it really ended up taking like really 8 years to what you have now, what you put out there now from the development stage.
I can't tell you, in retrospect, the funniest thing about it, and I can't say whether it's sort of hubris or determination, is that even after, the 11th try, where I'd invested a huge amount of time and effort in something that I was certain was going to finally solve this problem, only to have it be a complete disaster, and walk away from it for a couple of months and then come back, and for the 12th try, like, oh yeah, this is gonna do it. I've got it figured out now. And it's just this, that if I'd have paid attention to the track record, I never would have got the end of it. For some reason, I always thought the next one was going to solve the problem. So eventually it did.
Now, did you ever compete in barbecue competitions, or was it just strictly you went around and tried a bunch of, being a connoisseur of barbecue instead of a chef of barbecue, going out there and perfecting it?
The latter. I can get by. I'm a reasonably good barbecue cook, but I'm really the knuckle dragging oven engineer, not the cook. And the competitive aspect of it was never. It always seemed a little subjective to me. To sort of scratch my engineering itch to try to be as objective as possible about things. So I've always been much more interested in the combustion process and the oven, and then how to fabricate it economically and all that good stuff.
Well, one of the things, I've had plenty of famous barbecue cooks on my podcast, and one of the things they always say is, eating barbecue and competition barbecue are two different things.
Yeah.
They would never feed their family stuff that they make, for the judges at a competition, just because, with the competition, you're going for that one bite to, impress the judge, because they're sitting there, they're going over, hundreds of boxes of the same type of meat, and you want them to, you put all kinds of stuff in there just to get them to pick yours out of everybody else's. So it's not something you're going to sit down and eat a whole rack of ribs that are made like that, because there's just too much gunk and junk thrown in there. Yeah.
The first time I saw a guy whip out the squeeze parquet,
Johnny Triggs ribs.
This is not my thing. I'm probably a little more of a purist or a snob or whatever you might say.
Yeah. I think, back when, barbecue pit masters was really hot out there, I think people thought that's what real barbecue was. But once you cook it once or twice, or you even ask a pit master, they'll tell you that's not something you want to eat at home. It's right. That's something that you're just strictly trying to do something different than everybody else to get that one, pop that they're going to remember you. But I've had Malcolm Reed on, Stephen Reichlin, they all say the same thing. It's totally different. Yeah. Don't think you're going to take Johnny's Triggs ribs and feed them to your family and they're going to think they're great, because they'll probably take 2 or 3 bites and go, I can't eat any more of this stuff.
Right.
So the practicality of it is not the best. So you kind of just focus.
I've always been attracted to the idea of bringing it to the everyman, right? That's the whole idea, is not some, once a year or whatever rarity kind of thing, but there are elements of it that are very difficult. And so I've always been not attracted to sort of, making a barbecue pit for someone who's already an expert. If you're already an expert, you can make awesome barbecue with a, 55-gallon drum.
Right.
It's how do you help the other 98% of the population that's not an expert, but may have some aspiration, right? So
Exactly. Yeah, that's, like you can't go and tell Aaron Franklin how to cook a brisket because
right.
it's taken him many years of knowing his pits, knowing exactly how to start the fire, how much wood to burn, how much draft he needs, when to wrap it, all that. That's where the art part comes into. But not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to take that time and try to, take the, effort that it really takes to learn, how to do that.
Exactly.
He has to, because he does it on a consistent daily basis. So now it's second nature to him, but not everybody wants to take the time to do that.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about when you started getting this idea of, I want to build a better pit. What were you kind of looking at out there and trying to compare what you wanted to do? Was it more about what the final product you wanted to get? Was it more of how I can get because the way yours work is it's an inverted flame, and we're going to get into that a little bit deeper in a minute, but everybody wants to hit that blue smoke. I mean, that's the big thing. And anybody will tell you that's in barbecue. You don't want dirty smoke. You want that thin blue smoke. That's the perfect stuff. That means your fire is at the perfect temperature. That means you're getting all those volatiles are gone and you're just getting the nice, clean wood smoke. So when you started looking at building a smoker, what was your main focus on, and how you wanted to develop this, and what was your end game that you wanted to do?
Yeah, so I didn't have the end. So I've had a lot of great barbecue and a lot of revolting barbecue on account of going on all these barbecue tours. So I had a very I had a reasonably well-informed idea of what good barbecue was and what bad barbecue was, and I wanted to make good barbecue. And I started off on completely the wrong track on a number of occasions. But the idea was, how do I make something simple that controls temperature very precisely? And I think the first version I made, the closest proximity to it was like an oiler, right? So it was a refractory line firebox. And it had a temperature controller that was controlling combustion air to the firebox. So very much like an oiler style commercial barbecue pit. And I figured out pretty quickly that I could control temperature. Like, temperature control is not the issue, right? That's the thing that I focused on, that most people focus on is, well, is it 223 or 225, which is just, in retrospect, just kind of crazy, right? Doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be that precise. This is not sous vide, where we're sort of flirting with some food safety margin. We're cooking the snot out of everything. And so it doesn't matter if it's 225 or 230 or 250, whatever.
Well, when you're cooking with air, it's really hard to nail that down anyway. You know, you can't do that in any kind of smoker. And that's the other thing that blows my mind. All the people that get new into it, even with the pellet grills. Oh, I look at the dome temperature, and then I look at the one on the grate, and it's too different. Well, yeah, they are different because they're different temperatures in different parts of your grill, no matter what you do. They're
massively. I mean, we could talk about temperature for 30 minutes probably. And I'd love to loop back to that, but the first version, I was like, well, how do I load this up with wood and then flip a switch and let it go? And it, took basically 4 years for me to learn a couple basic things about it. The first is that wood doesn't work that way. Wood as a fuel wood is not a fuel. It's a fuel source, and it behaves very differently from the two fuels that wood produces. So when you take a piece of wood and heat it up, well, first thing that happens is the water that's in the wood is substantially off-gassed, but then the wood decomposes into two fuels that can actually burn. One's a solid fuel, we call that charcoal, and that burns in a surface reaction to form carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. And the other is smoke, right? That's the gaseous fuel. So if you take a log and heat it up, after it's dry, a bunch of smoke will come out of it. And that smoke's got about half the caloric value of a log, varies by species, but ballpark about half the energy. is in the gaseous emissions or the smoke that comes out of that log, and the remainder is in the carbon skeleton that remains. So, and those two fuels are, one of them is very benign, charcoal or carbon, super benign fuel. That's why it's so easy to cook with a charcoal fired cooker. You can overload it with fuel and just control the amount of oxygen you give to it, or control the combustion rate and the power and the temperature very easily with carbon fuel. The downside of it is carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide are colorless, odorless, and most importantly, flavorless. So because there's no hydrogen left, there's no hydrocarbons, it's just carbon. And all the aromatics have hydrogen in them. So the smoke is the harder part, right? The gaseous fuel. And that stuff is responsible for 100% of the flavor profile that you get with barbecue, which is the reason why you go to all the trouble in the first place. And it's a very difficult to control fuel. First off, you either going to burn it as a flame or you're not. And if you don't burn it, it's liable to condense on the surface of anything cold, like a brisket. And so if you've ever had barbecue that was black and bitter tasting, almost had a hint of turpentine, which is also made from a wood distillate, that's the result of very poor combustion of wood smoke.
Yeah, that's the smoldering effect. And people,
right.
And here's one of the things that I love AmazingRibs.com, because Meathead gets into the scientific part of cooking and barbecue instead of the traditional or the, like he says, the mythology of it, where people, this comes up in the Facebook groups all the time, how long should I soak my wood chips before I put them, and things like that, I want to have as much smoke as possible. And it's like, you really don't. And if you soak your wood chips, most of it's steam coming out. And then you got the nasty smoke, because you got to have actual flame. You got to actually have to burn to actually have the good smoke that you want. And people, sometimes it's hard for them to wrap their heads around that and understand, like you said, that you don't want that nasty white smoke, because you're going to get these bitter flavors. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, so I mean, I hope, what I'm hoping I can do is sort of get to the basic level. It's taken me forever to sort of sort this all out, but that wood smoke, right, which is boiled out of a log as it's being heated, and which, when it's all been boiled out of the log is now a piece of charcoal, right? Lump charcoal. Lump charcoal is what's left when you take a piece of wood and you heat it up without air and drive all the volatiles out of it, and you're left with that carbon skeleton. That's what we call lump charcoal. So that smoke, which has all the aromatics and can be responsible for flavors ranging from non-existent to spectacular to revolting, right? So that's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? It's wood smoke, and it's a very difficult thing to control. So as I mentioned before, you're either going to burn it or not. And so if you're focused on temperature control, and especially most typical wood fire barbecue pits, you don't have a whole lot of knobs, right? The one knob you got is the damper. And it really doesn't matter whether it's an inlet damper or an outlet damper. It's going to restrict the amount of oxygen flowing to the fire, which can have an immediate impact on the power level of the fire. But it also has an impact on the combustion of these two fuels. And so if you restrict oxygen for a charcoal fire, it doesn't matter at all, right? The carbon just sits there hot and it's waiting for some oxygen molecules to come by. And if you don't give it an oxygen molecule, it just sits there hot and waits for one to come by. So it's this wonderfully benign, inert fuel. The smoke is a completely different animal, right? And smoke and charcoal both are governed. The combustion of them is both governed by the so-called fire triangle, right? Which we all sort of learned in grade school or high school or whatever.
Scouts.
Scouts. Okay, so you got to have fuel, and you got to have heat, and you got to have oxygen. And if you don't have all those three things, you don't get combustion. And so as I mentioned, so in the case of charcoal, the charcoal or the carbon is the fuel. And if you if you have charcoal and oxygen but no heat, then you have a lump of charcoal sitting on your desk and it'll be there tomorrow, right? And if you have charcoal and heat but no oxygen, same story. It'll be sitting there tomorrow, hot and waiting for oxygen to come by, and that's what makes it so benign from a control standpoint. The smoke, it's coming out of the log, and first of all, the rate at which it's being produced by the log is a function of a whole lot of stuff, like how hot's the log, how dry is the log, how big is the log, right? And you don't have direct control over any of that stuff. And then more importantly, it's coming out of that log, and you got a choice. You're either going to burn it or you're not. And if you burn it, you get more power, right? So if I'm cooking in an offset and I'm trying to cook at 250 and I'm at 290 degrees and rising, and I shut down on a damper, that will definitely make the temperature go down, right? Because you're restricting oxygen. You're going to have lower combustion of the carbon at the base of the fire, as well as of the smoke, right? And so your flame is going to decrease, and that smoke will pass unburned into the cooking chamber. So, and the degree of combustion of that wood smoke is the major factor driving the entire flavor of the bark in your barbecue. And so, long way around my story here is I started off like a lot of people, sort of fixated on temperature control. And over the course of 4 years, figured out that was exactly wrong. The temperature control is A, less important, and B, pretty simple. The hard thing is combustion control. And the temperature of how cleanly you combust that smoke is that drives everything. That drives everything in the whole barbecue experience that gets you to go out and spend all this time on it in the first place. And the way I sort of analogize wood smoke is that it's a lot like crude oil. So crude oil, you stick that in a refinery in Baytown somewhere, and depending on what temperature you process it at and what catalyst you use and whether water is involved, et cetera, you can crack that crude oil into something as light as naphtha, right? Or conversely, something as heavy as asphalt tar, right? So how you're cracking those long hydrocarbon chains matters enormously. And in the case of barbecue, that's what drives the flavor profile that comes out of barbecue. So if you under crack it, right, if you under combust it with too little air, colder temperatures, you're going to get what's commonly called creosote, right? This real heavy, tarry, turpentine-ish kind of flavor.
Yeah, and that's what some people think it might be the paint on their smoker that's coming off on the inside, right, where it kind of builds up on the inside of your lid or your dome, and it's just looks like it's black paint flaking off. But that's
it's glossy. It'll be black and glossy in color. And so it's just condensing on the inside of the pit because that's a cold surface. And so you volatilized or you vaporized these volatiles, but you didn't burn them, and so they go into your cook box. And if they hit something cold, like the wall of your pit or a brisket, they're going to condense, right? And that this is a fuel, right? This is how people have chimney fires, right? They get enough creosote condensing on the inside of their chimney, and then if you get it hot enough, it'll burn. It's like, well, that's not the best thing to have on my brisket. No, it's not. So, but you can also take this too far, right? So if you burn smoke so thoroughly and so completely that you have obliterated all these aromatics and cracked them down to nothingness, then you don't get anything. You'll still get a smoke ring because you're still making NOx emissions, and that will react with myoglobin and give you a smoke ring. And so it will look like barbecue, but it just won't taste. It'll taste weak. And my experience with this is it's driven massively by moisture content of the fuel. And this is, I had an experience with a customer he's in Brooklyn, bought a Karubecue and called me up and said, I'm just not getting the flavor that I expected to get out of this pit. And this is, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. And so we went through all sorts of troubleshooting and, setting the valves and all this stuff. And long story short, it was because there's a tremendous tree disease problem in the boroughs of New York City, and you can't bring wood in from outside that hasn't been kiln dried to kill all the bugs. And so the moisture content of the wood that was available to him was less than 10%. And when you have low moisture content wood, that leads to very high combustion temperatures, which leads to excessive cracking of those aromatics. And pellets have the same reputation for precisely the same reason, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to touch on, because that's one of the biggest complaints, people going from a traditional offset or wood burning pit to a pellet smoker, is that they can tell it's a considerably less smoky flavor. So, and the flame in the fire, the little fire box there in a pellet grill burns hotter than if you were smoldering it in a smoker.
Yep.
And also, like you said, the moisture content, because it's all sawdust and they're made into little pellets, is considerably less. So
it's by specification, it's less than 10%, commonly less than 8%. So it burns. I mean, look, pellet cookers are just a spin-off of pellet stoves, right? And the whole push on pellet stoves was a cleaner way to burn wood as a fuel to heat your home, right? So it was all about the whole design emphasis of the pellet stove. The same mechanism you'll find in a pellet grill or pellet cooker is designed to break stuff into nothing, right? So that you're not pumping all this visible smoke into the atmosphere. So and it's not a function of it's just a function of the fuel, right? The moisture content of the fuel matters enormously, has a big impact on the combustion temperatures, and the combustion temperatures has an enormous impact on flavor profile. So that's kind of the big aha. And over 4 years of messing around with this, and so my objective changed. It was not about, well, how do I have this super precise temperature that can run for a long time without operator attention. It was, how do I make great barbecue? How do I get the right flavor profile out of a wood fuel? And that really is, I found it to be a richer vein, right? Because that's the thing that is viewed as a black art, right? Where, how do these people do it? Well, people that are cooking with an offset pit that are consistently making really high quality, great tasting barbecue, they have pattern recognition from years and years and years of experience, so that they can pick up a log and they know its moisture content by how much it weighs. And they know whether they're going to use the wetter one now or the drier one now, and how they're going to bank the coals, and how to keep a good crown of flames, how to keep clean combustion, and to maintain about the right level of power to keep temperature approximately where it needs to be.
Yeah, it's not something you can learn from a book or
Nope.
figure out overnight. Like, if you ever talk to Aaron Franklin or see any of his interviews, he said he didn't start out cooking great brisket. It took him, many years before he still today says he's still learning and still adjusting, and still, even though he produces consistently, awesome barbecue, he still looks at it as, there's things he might be able to tweak here and there, but it's a constant learning thing. And I want to kind of circle back a little bit, and because one of the things, and I just did a video on this, where I think a lot of people that are new to barbecue or new to outdoor cooking tend to not understand the difference between lump and briquette charcoal.
Right.
Because even though lump charcoal it's charcoal, most of it is charcoal, there's still a lot of it in there. There's pieces, especially when you get some of the stuff from South America with its more dense wood, that it's not 100% carbonized. So they get some off flavors from the charcoal. And I've had people say this a lot about someone like maybe the Kamado Joe big block, that's mostly from that axe breaker, really dense wood in South America, that it's like a chemical, smell or whatever when it burns. Well, it's because it's not fully carbonized. So that's another thing you got to look out for, especially when you think you're burning charcoal, which is really shouldn't have any kind of flavors or
Right.
to it. But that's another thing. It's just, if it's not fully carbonized, you're going to get those smokes and flavors from it.
Yeah. So this is the paradox of the charcoal cooker, right? So as you point out, charcoal in theory in the highest quality charcoal will be 100% carbonized, right? That takes a lot of energy to carbonize wood into charcoal. And so it's no surprise that frequently you see charcoal that has a non-carbonized bits. So there's still volatiles in it. Okay, so I just made the case that volatiles are important. They're the source of all your flavor. And in fact, people who cook with charcoal will frequently add these chips or chunks. And why do they do that? Well, they do that because charcoal has no flavor, right? So if you want aromatics to create a flavor profile, then you have to add something that hasn't been carbonized. But the paradox is that the charcoal cooker is designed to operate oxygen starved, right? It's the whole basis for the airtight design of a charcoal cooker. And it doesn't really matter whether you have some slide valve or ball valve or gate valve or globe valve or some automatic air blower. They're all designed to control temperature by limiting the amount of oxygen that the fire gets, right? So, which, as long as your fuel is pure carbon, works just great, but is flavorless, right? And now we introduce some volatiles into this, and we wonder why we get off flavors. And the reason why is the wood, whether it's chunks or chips or uncarbonized remnants in the charcoal, has a 0% chance of burning as a clean flame because you're operating oxygen starved.
Right.
So what you're getting is you're getting a charcoal fire plus some poorly combusted or uncombusted wood smoke, and that's why it's people are measuring out ounces of
yeah.
chunks and chips and stuff like that, and so it's a paradox, right? If you want, and there's sort of no way around it, at least none that I'm aware of. If you want great barbecue flavor, that comes from properly combusted wood smoke. And there's really only one way to get that, and that's from a natural log fire. There may be some other scientific ways of getting it, like there's some technologies used industrially that are using superheated steam as a way to generate volatiles from wood. But within the sort of realm of the everyman, the only way to get that is from a properly combusted fire comprised of natural air seasoned wood logs.
Yeah, and I see a lot of it, especially in the barbecue world. You'll see they'll come up with methods like with the Weber kettle. They'll have the snake method or the minion method, where they're putting the smoking wood underneath the charcoal, so that they can try to get that the volatiles to burn off when the smoke rises through the fire. And that's kind of similar to the way the KBQ works, but yeah, there's so many different things that I've seen over the years and different methods and things, people trying to accomplish this. So, hey, all, it's Darren, and I want to take a second to talk to you about the high-powered torches from Grill Blazer, the grill gun and sous vide gun. I was lucky enough to be a part of this project long before it was a Kickstarter, and I love them. If you're looking for something to sear your food within seconds, check out the sous vide gun. If you're looking for a torch to light your grill and have it up and cooking within 5 minutes, your lump or briquettes, check out the grill gun. You can also light outdoor fire pits and your fireplace within minutes. Check it out, guys, at the link below and get 10% off your order. Check out the grill gun and the sous vide gun by Grill Blazer. I'm going to go ahead and pull up your website real quick so people can understand what we're talking about here, because they're hearing us talk about the KBQ, and I want to kind of go into what your cooker actually does. It's so much different than anything else on the market, and this is your website here, KBQ.
Yeah, so
US.
Hit that how it works link.
There we go. And let's hit the inverted flame first. So this is the top of your pit, and it looks totally different than anything anybody's ever seen. So let's walk us through this part.
Yeah, so the This ended up. I mean, this is towards the end of the 4 years of all the experimentation. Most barbecue pits. So if you think about an offset pit and many other pits that share the basic sort of same physical flow, the characteristic of the offset pit is that 100% of the power that's made in the fire goes into the cook box. All right. So we have this tight linkage between temperature and combustion, which is fine as long as you maintain a perfectly shaped and perfectly sized fire. But that's hard for a lot of people to do. And this is sort of operates on a suction principle where the fire is free burning at all times. And you can see these vents on the side of the firebox that provide plenty of combustion air at all times to the fire. And I'm only pulling heat into the cook box as it requires it. And so there's an exhaust fan. You can see it off to the right-hand side there, what I call a control box. And that's what pulls air out of the cook box and blows it overboard. And because the cook box is substantially airtight, it then starts drawing heat from the firebox. And so that fundamentally sort of decouples the cleanliness of combustion, which is always maintained, from the temperature control problem. So that is a substantial innovation. That's the basis of the first patent I got on this technology. And everything else sort of keys off of that. So the idea of being able to turn the fire upside down, pull the smoke through the bed of coals at the base of the fire, which is always kept well oxygenated by those air vents. And that it actually will produce clean smoke from 10% draw to 100% draw. So it really does decouple the temperature control problem from the combustion problem. And all the other stuff was kind of derivative from that. Like yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so, and I think this is the thing that people probably are trying, like we had discussed earlier, instead of having like I'd say a barbecue guru or what have you, the fireboard that has a fan that kind of blows air in or limits the airflow. You just let this fire burn.
Right.
You're not controlling the way the fire burns. So you're giving it all the oxygen it needs. You're not controlling the temperature of the fire. You're just controlling how much of that temperature gets into the cook box with the smoke.
Exactly.
Which is totally different than any other cooker out there on the market.
Right. And so the second innovation, the smoke selector, which you can see those two valves on the backside of that firebox. And actually there's another. Yeah, exactly. So that innovation came from this customer in Brooklyn, right? Because in my attempt to solve it, this is even before I figured out the real issue was kiln dried wood. When I attempted to solve it, I was like, okay, well, it's taken me forever to figure out how to make clean smoke. That's the hard part. So surely I can make dirty smoke, and it's trivial, right? You just bypass the bed of coals. So that upper valve, or the so-called dirty smoke valve, that just leads into the same tailpiece, but doesn't go through the bed of coals. So that's a way of pulling smoke off the fire that's more like what the smoke in a traditional offset, right?
Yeah, it's got more volatiles in it. Yeah,
it's got more volatiles in it. So now just by manipulating those two valves, you have very good control over the combustion process. You can get clean smoke out of the bottom, or you can get dirty smoke out of the top, or you can get some combination thereof. So
gotcha.
Again, it's taking this traditional operator problem running an offset pit where you have to solve a whole lot of problems simultaneously, and now they're broken down, and you can sort of solve them separately. You can solve the temperature problem with a thermostat. You can solve the flavor problem with two little valves in the back of the firebox.
Yeah, but you don't have to worry about how big or how small your fire is, because you're just gonna let it run. You're gonna put whatever fuel. Which in an offset, that's another big thing, is you got to control the size of your fire and try to keep it where it is. And that's one of the things watching a lot of different pit masters, and especially with Aaron Franklin, if you watch his master class, that's where all the work is keeping that fire at a certain size and certain temperature and certain burn rate, and keeping, being able to put that log in every, 15 minutes or 10 minutes or however long it is,
Yep.
So
it's very much like, if you go back and rewatch the Barbecue at Franklin series or watch the masterclass, particularly the Barbecue at Franklin series, which is available on YouTube for free, most people miss the most important stuff in that video. And that's every time you hear the chop box go, or you see his little hatchet split a log in half, and look at the size. So he's running a backyard scale offset pit. His pieces of wood are this big, right?
Yeah.
And he's not stuffing some 20-inch long log into his 60 pound capacity offset.
Everything is controlled. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's controlling the power level by controlling the size of the fire, not by controlling air. There's always a surplus of air, and that's the only way you can keep it burning clean.
Exactly. So let's go into, so we talked about your smoke selector here.
Yeah.
And that's these holes on the back. So you can have it where it's running full bore through the coal bed. So you're going to have your cleaner smoke here.
Yep.
You can have it do a little bit of both, right? You can have it like partially open on the bottom, partially open on the top.
Yep.
And then just open on the top and then closed on the bottom. So
those are poppet valves. I mean, it's just a simple style of same kind of valve you see in an engine block or engine head, I should say. And they're really designed to be open or shut. They're not really well designed for throttling characteristics. That's getting a sort of false precision. I tend to use them more in the time domain than adjusting the degree of openness. Right. So I will often, like if I'm doing ribs or something like that, I'll run for the first couple hours with both poppets open for a sort of middle of the road flavor profile. And then I'll shut the upper one and just keep it clean for the balance of the cook. But everyone's flavor preference differs. And so that's an easy way to have pretty positive control over the flavor profile you're going to get.
Now, what would the kind of wood, how much of a difference does that make? So if I'm burning oak over pecan, is it more of just a little bit of a,
so in my experience,
preference
there's a couple of things to unpack out of that. First is, at least in my experience, the degree of combustion has a far larger impact on the flavor profile than the species. And so that's something that people frequently conflate. Right. But if it's everything else held constant, I think the species is much less important than degree of combustion. Having said that, some species are better than others, particularly with this technology. I'm relying on the bed of coals that forms at the base of the fire to provide the heat and source of ignition for the smoke that's being pulled down through that base of coals. So it's important to use a fuel that produces a durable bed of coals, and some woods are much better at that than others. And frequently it's a function of density. So oaks are good, hickory is good, mesquite is terrific. Pecan is a much less dense wood. It tends to not form a very durable coal bed. And some of the other lighter woods are, they have the same issue where they don't make a durable bed of coals. So it can be difficult to maintain that bed of coals, unlike with an oak or mesquite or hickory.
Cool. So let's talk about the auto draft function here. So let's, everything gets kind of pulled into the chamber, like you said, and you're controlling, instead of controlling the heat of the fire or the oxygen flow to the fire, you're controlling how much of that heat gets into the chamber. So
right.
Let's talk about that convection again. Yeah.
So the auto drafters, it's a simple little box with components, all of which were invented before World War II. Right. So it's, I'm the warranty department as well. So I try to keep it reliable and simple. And it's basically take the lessons of Navy nuclear power and try to apply them to a barbecue pit. And that means first and foremost, you don't candy it up with a bunch of fancy electronics if you don't have to. So there are two fans in there. They're the same type of fan that's in your convection oven at home. So it's a shaded pole motor. It's very reliable. no capacitors or anything fancy like that, no electronics, and then a mechanical thermostat. And so this is just, again, the same kind of thermostat you'll see in your kitchen oven, that same type of part. And that thermostat is controlling one of those two fans. So the two fans, one is for convection purposes, and all that's doing is circulating air within the cook box, just like the convection fan in your oven would, which helps improve uniformity of temperature within the cook box, and is also used to dilute the hot gas plume coming from the firebox.
Yeah.
So
and people should understand that all pellet grills pretty much have a convection fan in them too. So
yeah. And the second fan is a draft fan, and the draft fan, all it does is suck air out of the cook box and blow it overboard. And as I mentioned earlier, that creates a slight vacuum in the cook box, which in turn draws hot gas from the firebox. And so if you sort of superimpose these two flows on top of each other, the draft flow and the convection flow, you end up with a merged flow in a mixing tube in the back of the cook box that just helps to dilute or knock down the temperature of the hot gas from the firebox before it comes in contact with the food in the cook box. And so it's that simple. When the pit wants heat, it sucks it from the firebox, and when that temperature requirement's satisfied, then the draft fan shuts off, but the convection fan continues to run, and we just wait for everything to naturally cool down until the thermostat trips it back on again.
Yeah, and that convection fan makes sure the smoke is evenly distributed throughout the cook box, and it's hitting all your food, no matter what rack it's on, or how much capacity you have in there. I think you said it's 60-pound capacity about. Yeah,
I mean it's about
depending on what you got in there.
Yeah, you could do 4 15-pound briskets, or you can get to 60 pounds, 12 5-pound chickens, or I don't know, maybe 6 pork butts, 7.5 pound. You sort of get there a lot of different ways, but if you max it out, it can hold about 60 pounds.
And a whole, bunch of ribs. I'm sure racks of ribs.
Yeah. And ribs it's an interesting point, right? Because, ribs have a lot of surface area. So when you put a bunch of cold ribs in a barbecue pit, you have a whole lot of heat transfer going on because there's so much surface area per volume. And this pit, that draft fan is just going to run until the temperature at the auto draft meets the requirement. And so you'll see early in a cook typically a larger dead band, and then that will decrease through the course of the cook because there's less heat transfer going on. But a typical dead band for this is maybe 30 degrees. So if you're cooking at 250, it'll sort of swing between the mid 240s and the mid 260s, for example. Which is fine. I get comments, and there's no shortage of sort of technophilia in the barbecue space. But it doesn't matter. I mean, you heard Chris Young when you had him on, he was talking about using a thermometer just, a millimeter underneath the surface of a meat. And if you did that here, the air temperature is swinging up and down by 30 degrees, but the surface temperature of the meat isn't moving half a degree over that 30-second cycle. So it really doesn't matter. And so I do it this way just to make it simpler and more reliable.
Now, do you find that the food cooks faster in your cooker than it would in a conventional? Yeah,
and that's the convection. That's the convection. So it's just like your convection oven at home. You can expect to knock 20, maybe 25% off a typical cook time, all else equal. And that can be helpful as well. I mean, sometimes you want higher air velocity. Like if you're cooking chicken, I mean, the most important thing in cooking chicken is to dehydrate the skin before you even put it in the pit, right? And let it sit in the fridge for a couple of days to let the skin dehydrate. But you want to get aggressive dehydration of the skin to get it to sort of crisp up. And to that end, higher velocities can help. In other cases, you might not want air velocities. And so you can sort of play with that. The pit's designed to take a regular hotel pan, or a gastronorm is the international standard. And so I've had customers who they'll make a pan sandwich and put a steam pan in low and then one above and their meat in the middle. And so all the air is sort of going around the meat to slow down that heat transfer. So you can really play with it with a bunch of off-the-shelf items. And I've had customers put water pans in the bottom, and we could get in a whole long discussion about water pans, but you can put 2 in there and water in both of them, and the top one sort of intercepts the grease so that the bottom one can continue to evaporate more aggressively. So you can mess around with all sorts of configurations because it's an industry standard rack system.
Yeah. So we're going to take a look here. This is the actual pit here. It shows you how much room is in it here and the configuration. You got your firebox up on top and your fan here.
Yep.
And so one of the things people would notice right off the bat is the firebox is on top of the pit and it's kind of small compared to, if you look at it to an offset or, a big pit barrel or something like that, your fire is relatively small and you can't really put, load it up like you could a big.
No. So it's actually about twice as big as it needs to be. So it just doesn't take that much energy to run an oven that's that small. And I get the question. So there are a lot of questions that come out like, why is it on top? And the answer to that is, there are actually a couple answers to that. One is, if you're barbecuing, you're going to be in that firebox all the time, like twice an hour, and you're going to be in the cook box like maybe once every 4 hours or 8 hours. So it's more important to have the fire be convenient than have the meat be convenient, unlike grilling when it's exactly the opposite.
Right.
The second reason is that to make the temperature control work, it's important to not have a natural draft in the system. And so if the firebox is on the bottom, then that's going to create a natural draft, just like in an offset pit, pulling air through the pit when the fan's turned off. And what you want for a simple control system is you want flow when the fan's on and you want no flow when the fan is off. And so having the firebox on top like that assures that there's no natural flow in the system whenever the fan is not calling for heat. As to the size of the firebox, and I get the question all the time, hey, can't you just make a bigger firebox so I can load it up with wood and then I can get some sleep? And so this is back to the same issue of wood as a fuel.
Right.
The wood in that big hopper doesn't know it's supposed to stay cold. All that wood is going to heat up at the same time, and in 30 minutes, you're going to have all that gas coming out of that wood, and you are going to burn it or waste it and just have a pile of charcoal, and now you've got a very expensive charcoal cooker.
Yeah. And it goes back to the difference in an offset than this, because in an offset, you're restricting the airflow, so you're controlling how fast that fire burns, where this, you're just letting it go.
Well, in an offset, you have a choice, right? It's depending on how you manage it. So if you watch an expert manage an offset, look at Aaron Franklin's pit.
Yeah, he lets his fires go.
There's no damper on the stack, which, by the way, is the right answer. And there is no damper on the door, right? Because the door is designed to be open. You shut the door when you're not cooking.
Right.
And the idea is it's a free-flowing system, and we're going to maintain temperature by maintaining the size of the fire, and we're going to keep the combustion clean by maintaining the shape of the fire. So it's compact and well oxygenated, and you got a good crown of flames burning the smoke that wood fire is creating. But a lot of people get an offset and they build a fire that's too big, and they control the temperature by restricting combustion air, and that degrades the quality of smoke, period.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of people, if they're used to using, let's say, like I have the Kamado Joe or a Big Green Egg, ceramic type grill where your fire's on the bottom, and the only way you can control a temperature is by limiting the oxygen,
right,
or the airflow. So,
so that's
what they're used to. You could load it up with charcoal and
right,
let it run for 12 hours and not even have to worry about it because you're limiting the airflow to it.
But that's the Achilles heel, if you will, of that architecture, which is it's oxygen starved. And so when you start introducing volatiles, you have no way of controlling their combustion. It's going to be incompletely combusted because you're oxygen starved.
All right, so let's continue to look and see what this pit has. This is one of the things I really like about your website. You got this little disclaimer here. Make sure this pit's right for you. So,
life's too short to have an unhappy customer,
right.
And so I would rather, I'd rather have folks self-select out, and there's no shame in saying I don't want to mess with a barbecue pit for, whatever, 6, 8, 12 hours to make brisket. Okay, good. Because there's like a million other options out there for making low touch barbecue. So get one of those. Don't get my pit and be unhappy that you got to tend the fire twice an hour. Right. If that's going to make you unhappy, buy something else.
Yeah, because there's no way around it. When you buy one of these, you're going to have to feed it wood. It's just like a beast. Just if you bought it if you bought a offset smoker.
It's exactly right. It's kind of like an automatic transmission, right?
Yeah.
You still got to drive the car. I'll shift the gears for you, but you still got to drive the car. It's not an Uber.
Right. And so you do have to feed this thing, because that's just the whole point of it, is you're feeding it wood, real wood, and it's not smoldering. It's cooking full blast, and you just need to keep feeding it. So
right.
How do you what is the manufacturing process like? Because there's this is all stainless steel, all the components, are they all made in house? Do you have like another company make the fans for you, and you put it together as like a kit? Or how is this all put together?
So I have a local shop here in Dallas that laser cuts to my so I do all the design and all the drawings and produce the cut files, and they laser cut to my specification. And then I do all the forming and breaking of the stainless steel in the assembly. It's riveted assembly, and I wire up all the control boxes at the component level. So, and it's all done in a 3-car garage.
So you do it all yourself. You hand build these things. You get all the parts, lay them out, and just hand build these things and ship them out.
Yeah, it's a garage, and it's a 3-car garage enterprise.
Now, you've been doing this quite a while. I know you got patents on the design and all that. So have you ever had anybody come to you, or any of the bigger companies say, hey, I'd like to buy this design from you and produce these on a mass market type scale? Or
no, I think it's maybe there have been some discussions. I think it's just a niche, right? And the question is, how big is the niche? There are a whole lot of offset pits and being sold, and there's a highly fragmented supply base of offset pits, and so you could argue that there's a pretty big market, but it's fragmented, and who really knows, right? There's reasonably good numbers on like grills and stuff like that from some of the industry trade associations, but it's pretty unique. So I don't know if it's mainstream enough, but it's always, at some point 20 years ago, pellets were not mainstream, and that's how Traeger sort of got it going. And now your pellet cookers all over the place. So yeah,
once their patents ran out, I think it was a big boost for everybody else to get into the pellet market. So now you got Weber making them. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to share my screen again, but we're going to go to a different website here. I want to go because I first found out about your cooker with on AmazingRibs.com. So I'm a big fan of Meathead and the and his website, because one of the things, like we were talking about earlier on, is that Meathead's one of the guys that looks at the science part of cooking and barbecue instead of just tradition or just seat of my pants, mythology, things like that. So he likes to put science in it, and this is by far his favorite cooker, he's told me on several occasions. And then you have people like Chris Young, who helped write Modernist Cuisine and worked for Heston Blumenthal, and discovered or started ChefSteps and all that. And then Doug Douglas Baldwin, who wrote the sous vide book on pasteurization tables. The guys that are big science buffs that are into cooking love your pit. So this is one of the things that really opened my eyes to it, is that you got people like Mike Meathead said this is his favorite cooker, and it's because of the way it works. And even though you're putting these together, by hand in your garage, let's go back to that. How many of these can you build in a week?
They take about 4.5 hours to
Okay.
make a unit. And so it's
you probably got it down now, right?
well, that's having it down. I mean, it's small batch. They're not one at a time, they're 12 at a time.
Yeah.
And so batch, whatever you do the math, batch takes 50, 60 hours, something like that, which will gobble up nights and weekends and keep you out of bars.
All right. So how many of these do you actually sell on a weekly or a monthly basis?
It's good. It's put my kids through college.
Yeah, well, that's good.
It's good. And last year with the COVID, it's crazy. I didn't expect it. I thought, the sky is going to fall, and then everything took off like a rocket. So,
I think everybody had. I know a lot of the grills and people were having problems getting a lot of grills are manufactured in China. There were a lot of people, a lot of companies that were hurting to get their grills, over to so they could sell them. Even charcoal, there was charcoal. People couldn't get charcoal and stuff. I mean, it's crazy, but yeah, this is one of the highest rated smokers, actually the highest rated smoker on AmazingRibs.com. And like I said, I've talked to both Max Good and Meathead, and they both love it. And some of the guys that really know and cooking and science really like the concept. They understand it. It works just like you said. It gets those volatiles out, and you got a platinum rating on Amazing Ribs, which is kind of hard to get from Amazing Ribs because they don't sell those. That's for sure. You got to earn your platinum rating.
they're very independent. I have a lot of respect for that. They're great guys, and Meathead does it right. He's just like, you know what? I'm going to provide real value here, and not be one of the long line of carnival barkers trying to, get your eyeball and get a click to get a commission on the internet. He doesn't roll that way. He does what he thinks is right, and people follow him because he's a good housekeeping seal of approval, right? He's
Well, he doesn't just try to blow smoke up people's butts. He'll point out things that are scientifically wrong. It's like his biggest pet peeve is beer can and chicken.
Right.
People just to sit there. Oh, I saw somebody do this and it looks cool. Well, yeah, the beer is not evaporating. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting in there, keeping the inside of your chicken, the lower temperature, so you could possibly get sick from it. So do you normally have these in stock, or if let's say I want to order one today? I mean, do you normally have a few that you can ship out?
I try to keep them there. There's always a run on them when the weather breaks in the spring, and there's always a run on them around Thanksgiving and around Christmas. But so the lead times may stretch out to a couple of weeks, but in general, I try to have a couple of them. I mean, it's a very small shop, so there's not room for thousands. It's not like Raiders of the Lost Ark with a giant warehouse full of barbecue pits. There might be, I don't know, probably the most I've ever had on hand is 8. So gives you an idea.
Well, so you don't want these to have 150 a month sales on these right now.
Well, it'd be a good problem, but it would be a big problem. So,
I know some of the custom pit makers like Lone Star Grills down there in Texas. They actually, some of their stuff, it's like 6 to 8 months out. I mean, if you want to order some of their things, because they make everything by hand, and they don't keep a whole big stock of them because they sell them out pretty quick. But I definitely could understand you keeping everything close, and it helps you with quality control. That's for sure. You don't have to worry about that. Well, I want to thank you, Bill, for being on. I think people can understand how your cooker works now, and hopefully they'll take a look at kbq.us and you can find out everything you need to know about the Karubecue, and also check out the review on AmazingRibs.com. Also, you got a Facebook page as well where people can go and ask you questions directly if they need to. And what else you got going on? And actually, they can check out YouTube. There's plenty of videos. I know my friend John Setzler has one. He's done a few videos of showing people what they can, how they can set it up, how they can use it. Different cooks. I think he's done some cold smoking on it with cheese and stuff like that. So showing people how they can use this in the various different ways. So perfect smoker from what I can tell. I mean, the way it's designed, like I said, you got big wigs like Meathead and Chris Young and all these people from Modernist Cuisine that love it. So I want to thank you again for being on. And if there's any other time you want to be on, if you got any new developments, I'll hopefully have you on. But everybody, make sure you go to kbq.us and you can check out the Karubecue, check out the AmazingRibs.com review as well. And Bill, thanks again for being on.
Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks again for tuning into the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I want to thank Bill Karau one more time for being on. Make sure you check out the Karubecue at kbq.us. Make sure you follow the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast and follow the Fire and Water Cooking channel on YouTube, Facebook, and I'll see you on the next Fire and Water Cooking Podcast.